Well, here we are just a few days into the year 2025. It's that time of the year when many of us have likely made New Year's resolutions, and a few of us have already probably broken several of them. Perhaps you decided that you would go to the gym, but instead you find yourself at the drive-thru ordering French fries. Now, technically, French fries come from potatoes, and potatoes are a vegetable, so you think that might be a healthy choice. Or perhaps you decided you're going to read more books this year, only to find yourself hooked on a new Netflix series. Resolutions often fail because we are not truly willing to let go of the old in order to embrace the new. I love to read the cartoons in the morning call. I read them digitally now. On just a recent day was Pearls Before Swine, and the resolutions for the new year that Pig puts out: do a whole lot of stupid things less. I've got this. Me too. I can do a lot of stupid things less often. That's one that I can probably keep this year. Now, the story of the wise men, or the Magi, in Matthew 2:1-12 is in many ways a story about a resolution, but not the ones that we tend to break, but rather the one that changes everything. These wise men from the east embarked on a journey following a star, and they brought gifts for a king: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But their journey didn't end with their arrival in Bethlehem. After encountering the Christ child, they didn't return to Herod as they planned. In a dream, they returned on a different road. Now think about that for a moment. They had a plan. They had directions, but their encounter with Christ changed everything. They couldn't go back the same way they came. I think this is true for us as well. Once we encounter Christ in our lives, it changes everything. As we celebrate the light of Christ in this season of Epiphany and enter a new year, it's a good time for us to ask, what do we need to leave behind us? For some, it might be sorrow. For others, it might be shame or regret. Maybe it's that habit of holding on to grudges that we have kind of nurtured for all too long, or the belief that somehow we are simply not enough. These are heavy burdens, and some of you are carrying them, and we don't need to carry them into this new year. Now, here's the challenge. Letting go is hard. I can speak from experience. Ask my wife about cleaning out the junk drawer. There are keys for locks. I don't know what these things fit in. There are takeout menus for restaurants that we no longer frequent. But throwing them away, to me, somehow seems wrong. I have a process. And my process is I've got to touch things, and I've got to think about them, and then I can let them go. But it takes a whole week just to go through the junk drawer that way. We get attached to the old, things that no longer serve us anymore. That's why the example, I think, of the wise men of the Magi is so powerful. They didn't cling to their original plan. They listened to God's guidance and embraced a new path. I don't think it was necessarily an easier road, but it was the right one. Life doesn't always go as planned. Sometime, like the Magi, we find ourselves with an unexpected detour. But detours can lead to incredible new experiences. Think about Joseph, the Joseph of Genesis, the last part of Genesis 37-50. Where he's sold into slavery by his brothers, and a famine comes in Egypt. But as a result of divine intervention, not only is he able to save a nation, but he's able to save his own family. That's incredible. A dramatic and tragic detour turns out as a divine opportunity. Similarly, the Magi's decision to avoid Herod and take another road home wasn't just about self-preservation, just looking out for themselves, but rather part of God's greater plan. Their journey reminds us that even when life takes us off of our planned path, God's light can still guide us into something quite beautiful. I often think of that song. I'm sure you have heard it. I've heard it many times at wedding receptions. Thank God for the help me with the title. Thank God. May God bless the broken road that led me straight to you. Have you ever heard that song? I actually have. You know, I can't remember the title at the moment. Right. God bless the broken road that led me straight to you. Let's just think about the contrast between Herod and the wise men for a moment. Herod was threatened by, God bless you, threatened by the news of Jesus' birth. He clung to power, scheming and manipulating in order to protect his throne. His insecurity led to cruelty as he ordered the massacre of innocent children in Bethlehem under the age of 2 in a desperate attempt to eliminate any threat to his rule. The Magi, on the other hand, approached Jesus with humility and reverence. I was saying before the 8 o'clock service, I placed the wise men here at the creche on the altar, and I was playing with them and imagining them in their different roles, kneeling, and how to position them in front of that scene. They sought not to control, but rather to worship. They brought their best gifts and their awe of the Christ child, which reflected a posture of trust and openness to God's leading, whereas Herod's path was marked by fear and resistance to God's plan. So from this text, from Matthew 2, if they are truly wise men, or it could have been women, but wise men, what practical steps might they offer? I think if we want to make a new road in 2025, we need to care for our spiritual selves. And let me just offer a couple of, for instances, or possible steps in your life. And you'll have to find a way to apply it. But let me just offer these. Make room for joy. Too often we approach faith as if it's a chore. I want to believe in Jesus, rather than understanding that joy is one of the fruits of the Spirit that Galatians 5 mentions, and to find ways to delight in God's presence in this new year. Some of you have been around Jordan for a long time. Remember, we used to talk about God sightings. In other words, where have you seen evidence of God in this past week? I use it many times at consistory. In the past month, where have you seen evidence of God's goodness in your life? Now, you can find joy in various ways. For example, when Frank, did I mention it was his birthday? When Frank picks a hymn that you really love to sing it with gusto, even if you sing it off key. I told as I was passing, one says, make a joyful noise. So I said to Michelle, give this to the person most likely to sing off key today. People say to me, you are especially at the 8 o'clock service, you are a really good singer. No, I'm not. I just sing very loudly. And not only that, but I sing the original versions of some of those older songs, like from the 70s, the music of the 70s. I sing the original version that even the artists who wrote them did not know. So make room for joy. Or have you noticed the beautiful sunsets recently? Oh my goodness, amazing. And then I see it on Facebook, and I'm like, I was so busy going here, going and doing whatever, I forgot to pause and look and say, wow, this is amazing. Find joy. Practice gratitude. It leads into practicing for gratitude. Someone told me recently that before they go to bed, they talk with their spouse and they name 3 things that they are grateful for that day. And all of us, I'm sure, can find 3 things, even if one of them is, I'm glad this day is over. There's something to be grateful for, and yet we don't necessarily name them. And we feel that sense of gratitude if we're able to name it. It can shift our perspective, right? It doesn't change the reality in front of us, but it shifts our perspective. Gratitude opens our hearts to God's goodness, where otherwise bitterness or resentment could dwell. Let go of perfection. The Magi's journey wasn't perfect, yet, they got lost. They're wise men and they got lost. They had to ask for directions, right? And of all people, who do they go to? King Herod. It's the worst person to ask for directions. But still, God guides them to Jesus. Our spiritual journey doesn't have to be perfect either. What is the phrase that we use in the United Church of Christ? No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're welcome here. We're at different places on our spiritual paths. It's okay. It's all right. We're not all going to be at the same place at the same time. And God can work with the messiness of our lives. What you're doing today is the next step is seeking community. The Magi didn't travel alone, and neither should we. We need to surround ourselves with people who can encourage us in the faith. So if you're not a part of a small group or a Sunday morning class or whatever, be part of that if you can. Volunteer. We have stuff every week that you can get involved in here at the church or in the community. Do something with others. Just simply showing up today, whether virtually or in person, is a big step of commitment. One person had texted me on New Year's Eve, and they said one of their resolutions was to be in church more often. I'm not naming the person, but I'm going to hold them accountable for that. I'm going to watch if they're coming or not. We need each other to stay on the right road. And then finally, to listen for God's voice. We say that God is still speaking, then are we truly listening or not? The Magi heard God's warning to them in a dream. So through prayer or scripture or hymns or whatever it might be, the conversation with a good friend, what is God saying to you? So if we are going to commit to working on our best spiritual selves, then there are going to have to be some attitudes and behaviors that are going to have to change, I'm sure, for all of us. I often think about the wonderful story in Luke 10 where Mary and Martha, the sisters, invite Jesus, their friend, to have a meal with them. And you know how the story goes. Martha is busy in the kitchen. She neglected to call DoorDash and get the meal delivered, so she decided to do it herself. I'm being facetious. And so she's busy, and Mary sits at the feet of Jesus, which was not the place for women of Jesus' day. But what does Jesus say when Martha complains? Martha, Martha, you are distracted by many things, and yet Mary has chosen the better part, right? The work has to get done. I'm always grateful for the people who roll up their sleeves and work, but sometimes we need to do some self-care. She was working on herself that day. So I came across We're Not Really Strangers this past week. It's a card game, but it's also a movement to get people to think more deeply, reflect on their relationships and on their own selves, and what they're learning about themselves. And Gail and I have done this in the past, where we'll ask, what 3 things do you like best about me, or something from your childhood, just kind of deeply reflect. So here are 3 hard truths about self-care. So if we're going to work on our spiritual selves in 2025, here are some hard truths that we're not really strangers have come up with, and I'm going to borrow from this. You will disappoint some people when you prioritize your self-care. People are going to have expectations of you that you are not going to be able to meet because you're working on yourself. Secondly, self-care often means doing what you don't feel like doing in the present moment to benefit the future you. In other words, the personal sacrifices of today in order to have a changed you in the next whatever period of time it might be. Third, your boundaries will scare some people away. Because when you say to somebody no, sometimes people will not like that very much. It's okay. Maybe you need to let them go. Fourth, don't neglect yourself taking care of someone else. A quick text back, emotional support may be what you need first before you can give it to somebody else. Well, relates to the next point, which neglecting yourself to take care of somebody else may seem like an act of love. God giving from a place of emptiness only leads toward resentment. And you've heard that, right? An empty cup, if your cup is empty, you're not going to be able to share that with anybody else. And sometimes people just empty themselves totally. And they want to do it and think they're doing it out of love, but sometimes it's just self-emptying and they got nothing left for themselves. Self-care requires letting go of relationships, habits, and choices that are familiar but no longer serve you. They're familiar but no longer serve you. It means also being honest with yourself, especially when admitting that truth is hard. Like looking in the mirror and seeing what you don't particularly like, but you know it can be different. And then finally, self-care is hardest to do when you need it the most. That's a lot of stuff to chew on, right? I'm going to be working on some of this myself. The new road that we are called to walk this year isn't necessarily just about leaving stuff behind. It's about stepping into something that's better. The wise men's journey ended up not at Herod's palace, which was the plan, but rather with the presence of Christ. So what might this year look like if we too resolved to follow the light of Christ more closely? Might we be able to find the presence of God in the detours, in the wrong turns, in the changes of our plans? Might we go another way, for example, where we currently feel stuck on that path? You know, when you just say, I'm not sure how to move forward anymore on that path, maybe it's time to look for a different road. What if we chose to walk a road of peace and hope and love? What would that feel like, and what would that take for us to feel that in our hearts and in our lives, truly? So as we begin this year, 2025, may we have the courage to let go of the things that no longer serve us. Adam Hamilton, in our study today, at our Bible study, at the Sarah Harding class, in the first chapter of his book, The Words of Jesus, talked about closing the gap between the way things are and the way things might be. The way things are in your life or in the world around us, and the way things might be, the vision for our lives and our world, and taking steps to close that gap. Maybe that's what we need to concentrate on in this year ahead. So maybe listen for God's guidance and embrace the road ahead. Because with God, all of the roads will eventually lead us home. Amen.